Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let the record reflect that all governing board members, except for Ms. Sexton Reese, who started her new job today, we have all members of cabinet here as well, and Ms. Hogan. And that will bring me to the welcome statement. I want to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting and remind the audience of the request to address board cards that must be completed and submitted to the board secretary if they wish to speak to an agenda item. Board policy provides for 2 cards, white cards to be submitted in order to speak to an agenda item, and blue cards to be submitted in order to speak during public comments. Policy also states there is a 5-minute maximum time limit per speaker. Due to the open meeting law, board members are not allowed to address items that are not on the agenda. If you do not want to address the board but wish to give your comments in writing, you can do so on a goldenrod sheet, and all members will receive a copy. Approval of agenda.
I move the governing board approve the agenda as presented.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, we have no public comments tonight. And that will take us right to our superintendent's report.
Good evening, Governing Board. First, I'd like to recognize that our dual language preschool was recognized in the Helios promotion, and we are in the beginning stages of putting in a dual language program for our preschool students, and there were many lessons learned about its initiation, as well as some wonderful progress made, so we're looking forward to its further development. Secondly, I would like to wish Hilda a happy birthday on Sunday. And a get well wishes to Dorothy Green, who is with us almost all the time, but we hope to see her again once if she's well. On a more sobering note, it's important that I share with the board that the recent rescinding of DACA was announced today, as many of you know and are following, by the president, and there was just a few things I wanted you to be aware of that the superintendents in the area and the state did, and if you'll bear with me, I'll read you a 1-page letter that we put out. And I want you to also know we have an immigration forum set up for September 30th from 10 to 12. The place is to be determined, but we're partnering with Chicanos para la Causa. And we're looking forward to helping and supporting our parents and our dreamers in any way we can. Bear with me while I read the letter. Arizona is the home to approximately 200 school districts, all very unique. We vary in size, grade levels, serve, and demographics. We vary in mission and vision. We even vary in initiatives and programs. Despite our differences, however, we all share the same values: love, commitment, respect, community, prosperity for all. We believe in our students. We believe in their limitless potential. We believe in their hopes, dreams, and aspirations, and we are committed to doing all we can to make them a reality. We also believe in taking a stand on behalf of our students and their families during times of great need. We believe that this is one of those times. Many of our students, staff, parents, and community members are DACA recipients or are DACA eligible. The DACA program, designed to help undocumented youth living in the United States, has been extremely successful by all measures. According to the largest ever national study done in DACA, 69% of DACA recipients have increased their annual salaries, 16% have purchased new homes, 90% have received their first driver's license, 65% have purchased their first car, and 5% have even started their own businesses. All of these measures have a direct impact on the success and health of our economy. Today in America, over 800,000 individuals are DACA recipients and are contributing billions of dollars to our economy. They are also filling much needed jobs in education, healthcare, technology, finance, and our military. The elimination of DACA will not only have a dramatic economic impact to our respective counties, Arizona, and our country, it will also have a significant impact on our school communities. Many of our employees are DACA recipients, from teachers to technology specialists. We have classrooms that need long-term substitutes, cafeterias that need cooks, sports teams that need coaches, and counseling centers that need counselors. With school systems that are already deprived of people and resources, this brings us great concern. But to us, the undersigned public district superintendents, this is much more than an economic or educational issue. This is personal. We will have students already living in poverty who will see their household annual income decline drastically, if not completely. We will have high school seniors, college within reach, who have to alter their post-secondary plans. We have alumni attending community colleges and universities who will be forced to drop out. We have high school and college graduates currently working full-time throughout the state who will become unemployed. Many of these individuals are breadwinners of their families, or even worse, the sole income. The social, emotional, and financial toll this will take on our community is far greater than the general public is aware. Today, although we serve different districts, we stand together as one community. We stand together with our students, staff, and families. We ask that you, in whatever role you play, with whatever influence you may have, stand with us in opposing the repeal of DACA. Signed, and I think there are 38 of us that signed it, and Creighton Superintendent, I did it too. So if anybody wants to see the letter, I'm happy to share it with you. And I'm very proud of the collective Arizona, it was statewide efforts we put this out Thursday, I believe. So just wanted to share with you that we'll do all we can to de-escalate concerns and help advocate for our families as they, stabilize. That's it. I do, I'm sorry. A little moved. All right, we also have another honor that we would like to discuss. We had a passing of Mr. Edward Allen Day, who was one of the endeared community members of Creighton, who worked in Creighton and who contributed and was fully a member of the Creighton community. And I'd like to ask Dr. Lugo to read a portion of what she ended up sharing at his memorial.
Thank you. Thanks for the honor to share a little bit about, in the Creighton School District, we called him Mr. Day because when he appeared on campus, it was truly a day of celebration. He joined the Creighton family in 1950, but prior to that, he was also a student. He spent 60 years of his life as a teacher, coach, and administrator in the Creighton School District. So let's put that in perspective a little bit. That's 10 times the average of our inner city teachers right now in Phoenix. And he was one of Margaret Dubois' teacher at Mackin School on his first assignment teaching. So I'm going to try not to read this, but one of the things that Mr. Day was known for was being a master of scheduling and also an avid fisherman. So he would come in the summertime and be hired by the principals to do their scheduling, which is a very complex task. When the schedule was done and then the teachers came back, teachers would often say, okay, I need to switch my time so that my prep is in the morning and my lunch is, at this time. And as a principal, we were able to say, oh, you need to go see Mr. Day. He's in charge of the schedule. And they'd be like, well, where is he? Well, gone fishing. So that was a wonderful help for us. But he really knew the recipe for a successful education. One was building a solid foundation. And an example of that was his Mathmaniacs Club that he did in his retirement at Loma Linda School, where he taught kids math facts and cribbage and how they interplay. Delbert Kwabihama, he was a student and now he's an artist. And he's in South Dakota, but he wrote on Facebook, he remembers receiving the Fractionist Award. And what Mr. Day would do would go to the art sales and get stuffed animals of all different sizes. And as you rose up in the ranks, you got to choose different stuffed animals. Andy Guerrero, who was a Loma Linda student, little third grader at the time, she won the big gorilla, which was bigger than she was. And she became, moved on to work in the HR department, got a degree in business, and now is working on a master's degree in business administration. I'm trying to convince her to come be a math teacher. The text is still there. So. The other ingredient that he had, number 2, was really take the time to show that you care. So Mr. Day loved a good story, and we would sometimes call them fish stories. But on those days where he came and subbed for the assistant principal or the principal, one of the things I noticed is there seemed to be a longer line waiting to get into the office. And what Mr. Day would do is take each child aside, listen to their story, put them together, and then dish out his punishment. Well, it really wasn't a punishment. It was nothing to do with suspension or lunch detention. It was bringing kids together and problem solving and working out through those things. And then the last ingredient that he really brought in the 60-plus years was one of love. And I remember a particular 8th grade student who was very tough, had East Side tattooed on one arm and Eagle Side tattooed on another arm. And he ended up in the office, and it seemed like they were in there for a really long time. That was when I could see his office through my office. And next thing you know, Jose not only is shaking Mr. Day's hand, but giving him like a real grand hug. And I pulled Mr. Day aside after he left, and I said, "What happened?" And he goes, "Oh, we made a pact. Once we reach our goals, we're going to do something." And I'm like, "Okay, what?" And he goes, "Well, I'm going to take him fishing." And I'm like, "Well, do you have parent permission slips? What's the district policy? And are you going overnight?" And he's like, "You know, I'll get that figured out, but sometimes you just got to take a kid fishing." So in remembrance, just want to say for Mr. Day, 60-plus years with him, and for allowing me that time.
Thank you, Dr. Lugo. That was very, very nice. Thank you. Governing board reports. Mr. Zaragoza.
Good evening. I think I'll just share a few things on my mind. When we remember Mr. Day and the need to something he was good at building these foundations. And Dr. Lewis's comments about where the superintendents stand on DACA. I'll just tell you, I was like surprised and like happy to see that the superintendents put out their statement. And of course I just looked, I'm like, we better be on that. So I was happy to see that we were there. I think for it to make a difference, like our community needs to know that. Like they need to feel safe, they need to feel loved, they need to feel protected. We know that just with like Maslow's hierarchy, like these things are critical. These foundations are critical for any learning to even take place. So I hope that we take it further and make sure that our community knows that, sees that, feels that, experiences that. The other thing on my mind is, in our last meeting, we had the presentation of student achievement, the AZ merit, specific just that part of the data. And one of the board members made a comment like, every year we hear from the principals, we hear a long list of things we're gonna do at all our schools, and then we have that same conversation again the next year. And to me that didn't feel right. So what I'd love is to have more regular conversations on our progress. I think a student achievement is a critical piece. Like if we provide, clearly we need to provide the love and the foundation, but there also needs to be to what end, and I want to make sure that we're giving our students everything that they deserve, and helping them reach their potential, because they have the stuff inside that we need to do our part well. And I don't want that disconnect. I don't want the board to say, we haven't heard this for a year. I don't want surprises. So I'm just going to challenge us to ask for the data, to see where things are going, to celebrate what's working, and also acknowledge where things aren't working. Thanks.
Mr. Zaragoza. Ms. Young.
To kind of build upon what Carl just mentioned and what Dr. Lewis has mentioned. In the beginning of August, I read an article in the Huffington Post regarding what if every school had this sign. Carl mentioned something tangible. I mean, how many parents are going to be out there, how many students are going to read what Dr. Lewis signed, the superintendent's declaration. Basically, it says, do Americans believe that all students have the right to feel safe and welcome at schools, or only a privileged few deserve such guarantee? And basically, it's a sign that could go in front of the office, you know, when you're walking into the office. It could go where the students get off the bus in the morning. It could be outside the classroom. And basically it says no matter where you or your parents are from, we are honored that you are our student. And it's given in 3 languages: Spanish, Arabic, and English. And basically it's growing. It's a national phenomenon. It's growing right now. It's on the East Coast. Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Canada. And it's started with the Mennonite pastor Butra, and it's rapidly replicated to counter Trump's anti-immigration policies. And I would like, unless some member of the board really hates it, says, this is no good, we don't do it, I would like each principal to have the opportunity to choose if they want it there or not. So, anyway, that's my 2 cents. And yes, I can leave.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Ms. Meshachri?
Yeah, I just actually wanted to mention something that happened at the rally, because I've been thinking about it, and it's been bothering me that I didn't talk about it at the last meeting. And it's our keynote speaker talked about how he grew up, and that's kind of his story, and how he said a couple things that offended someone in the audience. He talked about how he grew up black. He grew up in the projects. And I always say I'm from Vermont, I grew up in Vermont, but I am actually born in Philadelphia, and we moved back and forth between Vermont and Philadelphia. So 1st grade through 5th grade, I was the only white kid in my class for that entire time. So I kind of understand what he's trying to say, but he picked on a black woman in the audience. I don't even know what her name was. And she was incredibly brave and said she was offended by him saying he grew up black. He's a white guy. And I just think she was so brave, and not everyone probably agrees with me if that was an appropriate time, but I think it's never an appropriate feel-good time to tell someone that you just offended me, So I just wanted to recognize that in the spirit of improving cultural competency. And I think he handled it graciously. He apologized. He thanked her for speaking up. And it's important to me that we recognize that happened. So I just want to say that.
Thanks. I wasn't able to stay for that speaker, so I was unaware of that, so thank you. I just have a few statistics, because if I talk too much, I won't get through it, because I have too many former students who this is really affecting. Many of whom, by the way, I saw at the Trump speech, which to me was really heartening, to run into so many people that I know, and especially so many of my former students who were using their voice to chant and hold up signs in protest at the Trump rally that he had a couple of weeks ago. There are more than, and this is from Newsweek, by the way, more than 43 million immigrants in the U.S., according to the Migration Policy Institute. About 11 million are undocumented. An estimated 22% of undocumented immigrants are under the age of 25, according to the Department of Homeland Security. The Migration Policy Institute said that in 2016, that about 1.9 million people were eligible for DACA. About 788,000 have had their request for DACA status accepted, according to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. In order to apply for DACA, immigrants had to be under the 31 on June 15, 2012. They must have come to the U.S. before turning 16, and they must have lived in the U.S. since June 15, 2007. We're not there yet. In a Center for American Progress survey of roughly 3,000 DACA recipients, 9/10 of respondents said they had jobs. Their average hourly wage was $17.46 an hour, up from $10.29 before receiving DACA. About 72% of respondents were in higher education. After getting DACA, nearly 80% of respondents said they got driver's licenses. About half became organ donors. That's huge. A Morning Consult poll from April found that 56% of registered voters said Dreamers another name for people who came to the U.S. as kids, should be allowed to stay and become citizens if they meet certain requirements. The Center for American Progress estimated that the U.S. would lose about $460 billion in GDP over the next 10 years without DACA. About 700,000 people could lose their jobs. And more than 1,800 governors, attorneys general, mayors, state representatives, judges, police chiefs, and other leaders signed on to a letter supporting Dreamers and DACA recipients. And I just would like to quote Barack Obama today and say that this was just strictly out of cruelty, and that's all it was. I do hope that real change comes from it, but it was a cruel act, and that's really all I'd like to say. That takes us to consent agenda items.
Move the governing board approve consent agenda items A through M in accordance with policy BEDB-R.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right. 26A, restorative practice and PBIS review.
Good evening, President Castine, fellow board members, executive team. I'm coming here a little heavy-hearted after our conversation so far, but can't think of a better night to bring this information because it so totally aligns. And although we have work to do, I'm very proud of the efforts that each site has been making over the last 3 years, the progress that they've been making to ensure that our schools are providing that warm, welcoming environment, and how we are using these opportunities as teaching opportunities to help continue our students develop. Because as we have agreed through your direction and through the strategic planning processes that we've been going through is that we know we need to look at the whole child, and so we're looking at the academic component, and we're also looking at the social emotional component, and how we can't ignore one or the other because they really do go together, as well as we think about our beliefs of loving each child as our own, and ensuring that we are working together to foster mind, body, and spirit growth. So everything all is tied in together, and I come with kind of a heavy heart as we begin this, but also one of pride in knowing the direction that we are going and the efforts that are being put into ensuring that we are moving forward to this. So let's take a look at the journey that we've been on over the last 3 years. So I began preparing for this presentation by taking a look at our suspension data over the last 3 years. And what we know is that doesn't tell the whole story. There's stories behind the stories that go with those numbers that are on the charts, but it's encouraging for us to take a look at this. So what we'll be doing is we'll start with the trends over the 3 years, and then we're going to be taking a look at each of the school sites and the specific supports that they're putting in, where we are headed as far as with our PBIS and restorative practices, and then what specifically next steps do we have planned for this year. So if we take a look here, we're going to be looking at both from a district level perspective as well as from the individual school site perspectives. So our first graph there shows the total number of days. We're looking at a comparison between starting with school year 14-15, and then the middle is 15-16, and the final green one is our 16-17. So what you can see is that from the 14-15 school year in comparison to last spring's, the final data is we've decreased almost by 50% in the number of suspensions that have been taking place. The piece that I think that's important for us to take a look at and to remember when we're moving forward in this process is that as we see our data moving in and we see that we're going in the direction that our goal is to go, is we also have to make sure that we're ensuring that the supports are there as we're helping those children reshape behaviors, and teachers are feeling supported in the process, the administration's feeling supported in the process. So that's a piece that we need to be always thinking of as we're moving forward. We look at the total number of students across the district-wide. Again, we see we're moving in the correct direction. The direction that we want to is that we are having our kids be in school more, and we have a decrease of a little over 100 kids from the 14-15 to 16-17. These two graphs, just because it gets hard to see when we've got all 9 on one, so we separated them into 2 separate graphs. And this shows the individual schools information. And so you can see by the indication on the bottom of which school represents which graph. And again, as we take a look at this, we're seeing that we have a decrease of the number of students being suspended over the last 3 years. Something that you'll notice is that some of them have just a straight decline. Other ones have had an increase over last year, over the year before in comparison to last year, but there's a continual pattern of decreasing of student suspensions, the number of students. And the same thing here when we're looking at the total numbers of the days suspended by schools. We have one school that's an outlier, and that would be Excelencia. Michelle and I were talking about that tonight. They had some specific situations that happened last year that account for the increase. Last year we had several situations on the campus where it involved multiple kids, like a group of kids, and it was probably like 4 different times. And so then you see the changes. So as we look at our data, we also have to remember, well, what are the specific situations that are coming here and there. But overall, you can see that there's a continual decrease in the number of suspensions. So assistant principals and principals are really cognizant as they're looking at student situations and rethinking the number of days. So as we look at what took place last year, we made sure that we had our redesigned parent and guardian responsibility form. We were able to take care of that. We appreciate your input on that. One of the other significant pieces that we did last year is we partnered with Makisa, and we provided restorative practice training, and that was a trainer of trainers, so the assistant principals were trained, and then the assistant principals went back and trained their campuses. This was our first formal introduction as a district to restorative practices, so we know that that was a surface touch, and that we will continue to go deeper in that. One of the things that was actually great fun in putting this presentation together, we've had a lot of conversations with the school sites about what are you doing specifically on your campuses. And so Hilda, if I could have you give the folders to so you guys have the green folders? So within those, so on the screen right now is just one highlight from each school, but within the packet that you have been given, there are specifics for each school site, so that lets the board know specifically what is it that the school sites have in place to proactively promote healthy school cultures on their campuses. You'll notice that PBIS is a thread that runs through across them at different levels. And then towards the back of those sheets, you'll find 2 separate sheets. One is from Gateway and one is from Excelencia. And what that does is it provides an understanding of how we can say we are using PBIS. But for an example, Gateway is brand new, and this year they're really starting from ground zero and rebuilding the PBIS framework on the campus. So theirs looks very different in the sense, in comparison to Excelencia's, which has been really deepening their PBIS process. So just like with kids in our classrooms, we have schools that are at different levels, and so it's important for us then, as from Ed Services level, that we differentiate our approaches to our campuses. So as we continue to move forward, we want to talk about where are we with our positive behavioral intervention and support, otherwise known as PBIS. One of the things that came through last year as we were having conversations is district-wide, this, the district had provided training, I think it was like back in 2006, but quite a while ago, as far as the implementation of the framework. And there hasn't been a district-wide approach since. So what we know is that since 2006, we have had a lot of new teachers joining our forces. And so again, going back to that differentiated method, what do we need to do and how do we support that process? Piece that's important to remember about PBIS and restorative practice is it's not a program, that it is a framework and it's a philosophy building. And so how do we build off of that? So that's what we'll be continuing with this year. So here are the pieces that we want to make sure and address as we are helping our schools deepen their positive behavioral interventions. And it's first making sure that across campus we have established expectations and that those expectations have specifically been taught, and that we are reinforcing those behaviors as we see them. And then when we see a behavior that isn't aligned with our expectations, then we reteach and we help them reshape those choices. Then last year we introduced restorative practices, and that is really it's a framework that is that. So when we have infractions happening on the campuses, then how do we restore, both in the sense of reteaching and helping the child who is the person responsible for the challenge, how do we help that person gain different knowledge and how to handle something differently? How do we provide restoration to the person who was impacted by whatever the choice was? And then how do we then reintroduce those children safely back into the campus? So this is the framework model that is associated with restorative practices. And you can see the concept that's behind it is building healthy relationships, reduce, prevent, and it says improve harmful behavior, but what it means is it's just that reducing the harmful behaviors, and so we're improving that they aren't as frequent. Repair harm and restore positive relationships, resolve conflict, and then address and discuss the needs of the school committee. So it's just this circle that goes around and around and just a continual process.
Dr. Peterson, will
Yes.
you describe a little more about the needs of the school community? Because I want to make assumptions on what that is, but I want to hear from you on what does that mean.
So within the needs of the school, a lot of that will come from like a needs assessment that's done on the campus. So taking into the factor where, stakeholders will provide input as far as where they're seeing the specific needs that are taking place. What areas do we need to strengthen? What do we need to provide professional development in? So collectively developing what those needs are. So for an example, I'll step back to Gateway as they're in the process of beginning with the PBIS, is they took their TEL survey and they really analyzed that piece, and they analyzed their top areas of concern, and one of them resolved around behavior. And so then together as a staff, then they had some significant discussions at the beginning of the year to identify what those pieces were. So it's identifying the needs can change from campus to campus.
Okay, let me ask this question and tell me if it's something different.
Okay.
So I don't know, I think when I was a student, there's this idea, at least in my head, there was the teacher who worked for me, and I was the kid trying to get the knowledge. I didn't know that there were other kids in the classroom. Apparently there were. But when I think of restorative practices, or maybe I'm calling it something different, it's about we're learning community. Like, I probably have as much to learn from these other kids in the classroom. The teacher helps facilitate that learning. And when there's an infraction, it's not just that one kid who's like now suspended. We looked at those days lost of instruction, but like the rest of the kids are missing out because their learning community is not whole.
Right.
Its integrity is broken. Is that part of this, or is that something different?
It is. And so one of the pieces that would address that is the component of restorative practice that's called circles.
Okay.
And so the circles are a classroom time in which that conversation takes place. And so it's will be for us is helping our teachers to develop the strategies on how to successfully implement circles,
Yeah.
because can be precarious at times. So yes, absolutely, is how do, that goes back to the piece where those who were impacted, how are their voices heard, and how can adjustments be made off of that? Absolutely.
I just underscore it because I know as a board we've identified building our community, like the Creighton community is like a critical piece of what we do, and this seems to fit pretty nicely there.
Yep. And the
So it's
two.
about that framework of,
Yep.
okay,
And in a slide in just a minute, it'll show how PBIS and restorative practices really are integrated.
great.
So thank you for the question. Ta-da, there it is. Ta-da! So the piece that this shows is that how, again, the frameworks blend together. So you've got your PBIS portion that is that proactive, and what are those pieces that we need to teach and have in place to make sure that we're helping our community be a safe and healthy and welcoming environment. But we know that because we're dealing with human beings, there's going to be times when there's going to be errors. So then what's a restorative process that we can have in place to hold accountable and have the opportunity to restore whatever the infraction was or the error that was made. And so how we need to work together this year in developing the understanding of then how do we marry those two together. And one of the great things is that we're going to be able to continue our partnership with McKeesa, and they're going to continue to provide training, and an even more exciting part, at least for me, because it helps with the differentiation, is they're really excited about coming and coaching with the teachers and the leadership teams. And so, for example, on Wednesday, we have our two folks from McKeesa are going to be joining myself and Mr. Hirsch and Mrs. Heller and Mrs. Roach at Gateway, and we're going to sit down and we're going to be developing a plan and in which and we're going to start with middle school. So how do we provide that coaching for the teachers and for the students to help bring this into place? So that's going to be really exciting to be able to have that coaching piece with it too. And it's at no cost, so that's even better. So here's our next step. So our goal is to continue to develop our school district's capacity and expertise in developing supportive school cultures. So what are our plans for this year? So if you look at the bullets here, again, as I shared before, really looking at how can we differentiate the training for the school sites so that we can continue to help them scaffold as they're building their PBS and restorative processes on their campus. We're going to continue our partnership with McKeesa. We'd like to begin providing some parent and community training. And that's yet to be developed, but I think that's really an important part. And then we're going to continue to use our assistant principals as our trainer model. So they'll be our cadre of trainers as we are learning. And then to periodically be able to post things on the website, Facebook pages, to help further the understanding for the community. So those are our next steps.
Quick question, where do we stand in our policies as far as discipline? Like I know we had like some mandatory suspensions for certain infractions, and we had talked about making the wording more so it could be, so principals or assistant principals or whomever can make it a case by case basis, so there was a little more flexibility there.
And that was what we did off of the parent-guardian responsibility, is we added language and took out language that allowed for that mitigation for student services to, make those decisions that are appropriate. Also, too, it allowed not that binding language that had kids in grade bands. So if I had an error that I made a mistake in 6th grade and then no other ones, and then nothing in 7th grade, and then in 8th grade I made another mistake, that connection has been decreased.
Okay.
And then also too is in our committee that we have, that's been some of the conversations too, is about looking at those pieces.
So have our policies actually changed? Okay, so is that something we?
The procedure.
Okay. Is that something we still?
Well, Amy, what you might want to do is review our section J policies, maybe student conduct or something. If there's something that, I guess is my recommendation, right, as a fellow board member, if there's something that doesn't feel right, or if you want us to discuss that, I think that could be helpful. But because I think I would expect Dr. Peterson and Dr. Lewis would bring us, if the practices butt up against our policy, we clearly would need to fix that.
So we ran a little language tweaking by the attorney, and after circling around and around about it, we realized that existing policy gave the greatest flexibility,
Okay.
and that when we considered inserting the term of current present popularity, that it begged the definition that then reinstated lack of flexibility
Okay.
or room for error
Okay.
legally in due process.
Okay.
So the attorney did recommend keep it as it is, because and then we realized, well, we can do it through procedure, and that's the work that Dr.
Okay.
Peterson's talking about.
And that way, and with the parent thing, the expectations are more clear, so that.
Yeah, we did it through exhibit and through procedure, and then that helped us have the flexibility, but still stay true and congruent to the policy.
Okay.
Yeah, and Amy, for what it's worth, I remember as a board, we had conversation about the prescriptive punishment for certain infractions, which might be a little different. Because I remember, like, are we having an expulsion case for marijuana, and why? So I think we landed in a place that felt right for the board. But if you want to review them, they are section J in our policy book.
And also to Mr. Zaragoza, when you just brought up the expulsion, I did not include that data on here simply because we've only had one each year, and so there hasn't been a change. And I'm hoping that the board has recognized that when it does come, it comes with a heavy heart because we know it goes with it, but also too, it's the next step that we need to take. So we do not take it lightly, but I did not put that on here, and that's the reason.
Okay.
I was just wondering too, because I know that this is something that Falls District has been working on, as well as Phoenix Union. So do you guys ever have opportunities to partner or get ideas from each other?
It's so fun that you say that because actually we're going to collaborate together. We're going to collaborate, and Makisa is on board with us, and so stay tuned. We're excited about it.
with Mr. Smith, Dr. Smith, their superintendent, just last week, and he is hiring a director right now, and he asked if he could have a little time to onboard his director, and then we would begin more formal collaboration.
So what I would envision is we establish trainings through Makisa. We'll invite them to be a part of it, and then we can hopefully have some great conversations in supporting our community, because we're all together in the same community.
Well, and I appreciate your stewardship too, as partnering with Makisa and doing it for no cost. That's pretty fantastic. I know that in the TEL survey, there were items in there that were specifically about behavior, discipline, and teachers feeling supported. So probably, I think part of the next time this comes to us, I'd really like maybe specific pointed questions that are about specifically the PBIS implementation on our campuses, teachers feeling supported about those things, and just where's their comfort level with with restorative practices and what all of that means. So just something to kind of put on your radar, because I know that there was some commentary on the TEL surveys about that feeling of support, but as we go through, that's something that's key to the success of these programs. So yeah, just with that in mind.
Absolutely.
Any other questions? Thank you,
Very
Dr.
much.
Peterson. Thank you very much. Take us to item 9A. Mr. Mann?
Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Lewis, members of the executive team, it's my pleasure to introduce to you some members of our team that worked on the architect recommendation process, and then we're going to give you just a quick overview of the process, just so you kind of have a sense of sort of not only the linear nature of what we did, but also what we were looking for on the board's behalf to try to both create a short list of top candidates and then determine who might be a best fit for us as we move forward with the first stage of large rebuild projects for the bond that was approved last November. So, let me introduce a few folks in the audience who are part of this. We have Mr. Jim McVeigh, who was recently approved as our director of bond projects, obviously a linchpin member there. And then we have two of our principals, Yvonne Carvajal and Stephanie. I'm just drawing a complete blank on Stephanie's last name. Thank you. So, sorry about that. So they were kind of key members there as well. And then our band leader was our purchasing expert extraordinaire, Mr. Jeff Thomason, who's with us this evening. And I left the last for introduction because Suzanne Schweiger-Nichols, which I remembered her name, even though it's a little harder, was kind enough to go back and forth with me over a Labor Day weekend, which tells you something really like an awesome member of your community. And I'm going to ask her to come up and join me as we talk to you a little bit about that process. And one of the reasons Suzanne was one of the key members of our team is that not only does she come to us as a community member and a former board member, but also with her background and experience as an architect. And so I've been involved in these processes at a couple of districts, and I've never had an architect like come to the table with me. So that was like really super cool to have that person on board for this process. Don't want to belabor the timeline, it's like really boring, but just wanted to show you that as soon as we got approval from the board to move forward, we got to work. Got an RFQ on the street on May 8th. We had actually been working on that prior to the board approval to make sure we could move fairly quickly. Had proposals roll in on June 26th. They were originally due on the 23rd, but there were some clarifications that were requested, so we gave folks a few extra days to turn those in. And then we evaluated and selected finalists on July 13th. Everybody that was involved remembers that day very vividly because we spent about 10 hours locked in a room together. So it was actually kind of a fun day, even though it got a little claustrophobic after a while. And then from that meeting, we were able to select, out of a field of 10, we were able to select 5 finalists that came forward to do interviews with us in this very room on August 14th. And then once we had our top candidate from that, this process is kind of an odd process. I was recently someplace where they were talking about the way it works. It works kind of backwards from a lot of our other procurement processes where you start with price. So with this one, you start with qualifications, you narrow to your field, you kind of rank everybody, and then you go into fee negotiations. And I think it was designed that way with the intention of you find the best fit first, and then you figure out, are they going to work for you from the cost perspective. And so we initiated those on August 25th, got working with our top candidate, and are very pleased to be able to bring forward to you today that top candidate. We feel we've come to a really good negotiation on those fees. And so obviously tonight would be that recommendation. I mentioned earlier we had 10 firms that submitted. It was a really healthy field. It's always one of your concerns that you have if you get 2. Like, are you really looking at a good range of possibilities? So we were very pleased to have 10. We had a really difficult time getting those 10 narrowed, but we found 5 that stood out from the other 5, and then we had some folks that really stood out in that finalist field. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Suzanne to tell you a little bit about what our finalist criteria is.
So as you can see from the slide, we had a 200-point system ranking different experience levels and proficiencies with different rankings. The 50 points for experience with similar projects and innovation, flexible learning spaces was highly ranked. That's something that's really important, to have people who have experience in doing the kind of buildings, creating the kind of spaces that we are going to want to have for our students and our staff, that teachers can be able to work in and have some flexibility in what they're going to be able to do in those spaces. What types of spaces will they be? They're not just classrooms. There's lots of spaces involved in school rooms. in schools. 50 points for overall impression of presentation and team profile. What were those members like? How did they do presentations? Did they seem comfortable? We want them to be comfortable with our community and being able to meet with people. We want to be able to see how they perform in that kind of realm and how they're going to deal with groups of people that are different than who they might deal with at other times. 30 points, the ability to complete project with timeline on occupied campuses. We found 5 very qualified firms. I don't think there was one that didn't really explain to us that they had done it before, that they were going to be able to do it again, and that they really were not uncomfortable with dealing with our timelines, which makes you feel very comfortable with what they're talking about as far as what do we have to deal with in our campuses, have they done that before, and they had. Another 30 points for a collaborative design process that is broadly inclusive. We looked for key words in making sure that they were not going to be telling our community what they wanted. We wanted the community to be able to tell the architecture firm, this is what we want in our schools, and to be open to that. We had some firms that were very clear about doing that and others that were a little more murky. And that's where some of the changes, were some of the differences and where the different firms kind of reached different plateaus for our selection. 20 points was references. I don't think there was a firm that didn't have great references. And 20 points for the personnel that were assigned to the project and experience. And I think for me, that was one of the things that really stood out for several of the firms, that they had people who sounded like they had experience in it and that they were going to be really good at being able to lead the whole process and being able to do school designs and other building designs that we are going to need to have with spending our bond monies.
So there were a wide range of highlights that stood out to us, and we're going to hold back on one of them because hopefully in a few minutes you may get to experience it. But really one of the big pieces of the firm we're bringing forward for the recommendation was there was a strong focus on flexible tools and reconfigurable spaces. That we saw some presentations where it was somewhat new and different, but if you didn't like that new and different, that was the new and different that you got. So having that flexibility, that reconfigurability was really key. High creativity and operational thinking were really important as well. So when we throw kind of the curveballs and here's a challenge and how are we going to make this work and this is what we really need and our community wants this, we wanted folks that could get down and dirty with creativity and find ways to make it work. One of the really unique things that we did not see in any other firm, all of them have some sort of quality assurance process that seemed to take place sort of at the end of the process. But with this particular firm, quality assurance was not only integrated into every phase, but there was a team member on our project team whose job was to make sure that that quality assurance took place throughout the process. And then references, not only were the references solid, but if you've been around a while, you don't just do the formal references, you do the informal references too. And one of the advantages of, kind of the gray hair is you get to know a lot of people over the years. And so one of the really nice pieces that I got this isn't on the record, right, referral, or not referral, but reference check was, well, you can pick this firm or that firm and you'll be fine. But if you want a firm that instead of building the building they'd like to see on the cover of a magazine, they're going to build the building that you and your community want, then SPS Plus, who we're bringing forward for the recommendation, was the firm that you're looking for. So that was actually a pretty powerful reference because that was, as Suzanne mentioned earlier, one of our big criteria items was to have a firm that was focused on the needs of the community. And with that, happy to answer your
So,
questions.
Madam President, and with your permission, we'd like to encourage the vote with, if there's board approval, a second component of this agenda item where if things move forward and are approved, you would hear kind of the rest of the story for next steps. So I would encourage the board to consider making a motion and then ready for the next component of the presentation should it move forward.
Move the governing board approve the award of request for qualification RFQ. Number 18025, architect service to SPS and Architects.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you, members of the board, and we'd like to continue then with Mr. Mann.
So,
Yeah.
thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mark Davenport, who is one of the partners with SPS Plus, and not just a partner with SPS Plus, but also the partner that will be assigned to our project. And he's got a brief presentation for you and a little activity to walk you through. And I'm just going to move out of the way and let's get it together.
Thank you very much for having me here. We are very excited to be working with your school district at both Creighton School and Biltmore Academy. I'll try to stay in front of the microphone here, but I'm going to move a lot. So as we got ready for today, what we decided we could do is just take our 45-minute presentation and take some of the parts about our process and show that to you tonight, so I can try to be a little bit more brief than our 45 minutes for you tonight. So as we started our research and our preparation in looking at what was important to your school district and what's important to these schools, we came across this quote and just thought it was very powerful from Superintendent Dr. Lewis, and really wanted to focus on that word, reimagine. And so we could really resonate with what's important to your school district and also how we work as architects. So the other thing that we wanted to do was to try to find a guideline for our presentation, and eventually it'll be our guideline for how we work through the design process. And so we found some really important mission and values at Creighton School District, and so we organized our presentation around these four main topics: adventurous thinkers, collaborative learners, reimagine, and kind-hearted leaders. So I'm just presenting myself today, but we had a team of four at the presentation. My role is as partner in charge, and so the big two there is driving force and a district advocate. So that driving force means, what are the big ideas? What are the things that we want to really see at the end of this project? And that's my job, to make sure that the big ideas that we talk about even today, that we see those big ideas delivered at the very end of the construction process. The other part that's important is the district advocate, because obstacles come in a project and they have an opportunity to slow things down or throw a wrench in things, and that's my job to make sure that those obstacles do not get in the way of our project. So for example, I can see at Biltmore Academy working with the transportation, that has a real potential of being an obstacle. So that's going to be one of my main goals.
Already is.
Yes, exactly. So we want to make sure that we address that right from the very get-go. That's just the one thing that we've identified, and we know once we start working with each community, we're going to highlight what those big topics are. Over at Creighton School, we know working with the canal and what we might do and interact with that could have a big impact on what we're doing with our design. So we're going to make sure that that's a main topic also. And then on both sides is, how are these things going to happen without interrupting the educational process? So we've kind of worked with schools before, and that's kind of what this next slide is about, is who our firm is, and I think what makes us a little different and special, and at the end of the day, really right to work with Creighton School District. The big point that I want to kind of focus on here is that our focus is on innovation in Arizona schools. So one of the other things that I like to think that I bring to the table is I'm a part of a national organization where we look at trends in education and how can those trends help our educational environment. So I can bring those ideas back to the table, back to Arizona schools, and see how we can really make our schools better. So just to talk a little bit about how we're going to be starting, the beginnings of your journey, we started by comparing our process to the traditional process. So you kind of see these 6 steps, and many times that first step called programming, that's where you really interact with your community and you start to collaborate. Unfortunately, it's only one step of this 6-step normal process, where if you look at the design process that we like to follow, we call it the inclusive design process, where we have those first 3 steps are really critical to gather input and feedback and collaborate with your community, with your schools, and it's really the best way to ensure that the school we end up with is the school that your community really wants and deserves. So just to touch on the first couple ones here, visual survey. What that means is, how does your curriculum work? On the slide on the right, it shows an example of one of the other projects that we had. We took a real in-depth look at how that school operated because they were full. How are we going to actually have a project on campus and not interrupt the educational process? So we dig down deep to find out how we can actually make that happen. And the only way to do that is to find out how the school works. The slide on the left is just an agenda of focus tours, because many times when we start to work with schools, they know how their school works and they know how they could make some changes to make their school better. So we like to take them to go see different examples to kind of open their mind and open their eyes to see how other people can do it, how they might be able to do it. We just had this as a little transition slide because communication is huge, especially during these very initial phases. That next step in validating the program, so we'll identify maybe how many classrooms we're going to need and how many offices we're going to need, things of that nature. So we go through and we actually validate that by getting involved in the school. What you see there in that picture is from one of our recent projects. They had pajama night. So we wanted to see how that community interacted with that school, really get a sense of who that school is and what's important to maintain in the new design of the school. The other thing is student shadowing. We'll shadow students, see what their day is like and how they transition through the school and see what kind of challenges they may have and just look for opportunities for improvement. Because this buy-in, it's not just important, but it's essential. Because we'll go through many different design solutions and look at many different options. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that nobody has the question of, well, why didn't we do it like this? Or why didn't we do it like that? We want to make sure we flesh out each and every one of those ideas. This is an important one also for us, the stakeholder collaboration. The image on the left shows more of a formal process where the community will give their feedback to the staff, and then the staff gives their input to the architects, and so you kind of play that game of telephone, and we all know how that works with getting accurate information. And so we like to kind of take a model of what you see on the right, where we'll have that broadly inclusive process, grassroots development, that network of communication, so we can hear it directly from that community member, hear it directly from that student, so we know what that really means. And the big part of this process also is to understand that it's bigger than the moment that they're in. Because what that means is, again, they know what their school is like, and Creighton's a good example of that school evolving over time. They've added a building here, they've added a building over there, and so we don't want to just do this big replacement school as another evolution in that process. We want to make sure we look at it in a real big picture. So we just have a couple images of the aerials, and I can just kind of play around with some of these models the way that we did in our presentation. So we tried to identify what we thought buildings were going to stay and what buildings might have opportunities to change. And so when we have those community gathering meetings, those stakeholder collaboration meetings, we'll have examples like this. We can say, what happens if these buildings aren't there? And then we also have other new buildings that potentially go on the site, and where they might be, and then what does that site circulation look like? And so these types of tools are really easy for us to produce. As architects, we like to draw, but many times the people that we work with, they don't draw all the time. They need to move things around. They need to see what that's really like. So that was a really good example. And then the other thing, for example, at Biltmore Academy, in doing our research, we saw that there was a lot of really futuristic type studies. And so we want to make sure that we pay attention to wherever we put this new addition, what might happen in 10 years. We may not be right, but at least we want to think about what those opportunities might be so that if and when it does happen, that we've already set some of that framework in place. And then this one over here at Creighton School, we had a little bit more fun with the different colors and different ideas, and we sure did go through a lot of different opportunities on what could happen here, but I know one of our favorite ones was, because right now, it's easy to put these little blocks down. Once we build them, we can't really do that anymore. Is to start looking at, what if some buildings came on the other side and we started to look at potentially another face of the school. So, again, it's easy to do it with these models. We like to do that. It really does make it real and help people understand what we're looking at. So the fourth piece and the final piece that I want to touch on today is, once you start making some decisions, they create motion. And motion is used to develop that sense of place. And we put a real focus on that interior architecture side, because we want to see how is that space going to be used? What kind of integrated technology are we going to have in those spaces? What are the tools that we're going to give to the students to actually make most benefit of these educational spaces? And you can just see some examples of other projects that we've had. And then we started to look a little bit more, and I won't go into too much detail on these next two slides, but what is a modernized learning environment? You'll see that picture on the upper left. That starts to look like more of a standard classroom layout, and how can you take that standard classroom layout and just start to blow it up a little bit just to have some of those informal learning opportunity spaces. And that's where you see some of these images of different furniture. So you can find ways, because we know that learning doesn't just happen in the classroom. And it was interesting to hear, I heard that a lot tonight already. And so it's good to know that some of these concepts will really be put to good use here.
So will we be building a fishing pond?
The canals are fishing.
Oh yeah. And then the last slide that I wanted to just touch on today was a concept that we've been kind of throwing around a little bit is academic collisions. And what does that mean? One thing that we've looked at as architects is what are those next fields of education, and what are they going to be? There's many jobs that are there today that weren't around 5 years ago, weren't around 10 years ago. So what kind of space can we design to help foster those environments? And so many times you look at putting all the math classes together. Sometimes you look at putting all the science classes together. And so what about that concept of mixing them all up and having those different curriculums potentially come up with that new idea? And so that's just what that diagram is on the left. And then just a couple of images from other recent projects that we've had, just to show about what some of those spaces really look like. So that's about all I had today without going for a full 45 minutes. I could talk all night because I love this, but I'd like to open up for any questions that you might have.
Actually, if I could just throw one more thing out before we shift gears to questions. I think one of the things that was really unique for us as a panel when we looked at the 3D model presentation that we had was, don't just think about you've got this space and you're going to drop something into it. It was this concept of reimagining multiple possibilities and figuring out what the best fit for us was, which was really kind of unique. It actually completely changed. You could see as you looked at the people watching the presentation, it changed our thinking about what the potential of the project was. And so I think that capability for SPS and under Mark's leadership to come in and help us change the conversation about possibility is going to be very, very powerful to make certain that we maximize the opportunity.
Mr. Mann, my question's on timeline. I know I think if people knew that we're having these conversations, they'll be invited to give input. That would be helpful. I just know that as a Biltmore dad, the parking thing is a barrier to getting to school, and then there's a security concern, and I keep, no one really listens to me, but I'm like, we're working on it. I know, you have to. So I just been curious, like, what's the timeline to share with the community, and then ultimately see this through and have a new learning facility.
Yeah, and I know you're correct, so I listened to you because we are working on it. So, and actually, we're working on it. Stephanie, who I now know her last name's Damar, and Jim McVeigh and I met with Don Cross from the city of Phoenix. Was that just last week? Like the days all blend together. It was just last week, and I actually showed up a little late and had to navigate the traffic, so I got my first-hand experience with it. And one of the things that we've had in the works since my first day on board working with prior leadership at the campus was there's a county study grant that we put in for that now is finally coming through, but the timing of it doesn't hit our timing needs to move fast. So Don is actually it's either this week or next week going to be coming out to start a new City of Phoenix study to update the older studies, so we have that data to work from as we move forward. So in a sense, we're working on it already. The timeline for this project really is to have it completed by the end of next summer. So now that's assuming no barriers that prevent us from accomplishing everything within that time window. But the expectation right now is that by start of school for next year, we should have those pieces in place.
Great.
So that's the simpler of the two projects, even though it's not simple, right? Because that parking's not simple, but between the two projects, it's the simpler of the two. Obviously the reconstruction of Creighton School, particularly with taking a lot of buildings off of campus and having to move kids around and do all that's much more complex and lengthier. So that one probably has an entire additional year on it, and we'll also have a longer front-end design phase because you're limited. SPS has shown us we're not as limited as we thought we were, but you're more limited in what you do when you have a building to add and you're dealing with some parking structures, not parking structures, I didn't just promise that, parking lots and thoroughfares than you are when you're basically kind of starting the campus brand new from scratch. So that would be a much more involved process.
I just think it's also helpful when we ask the community for $85 million to see progress on this. So thanks for moving it forward. I appreciate it.
What are some of the ways that we will involve the community in getting feedback moving forward?
So what we've done traditionally in the past is we'll hold like a barbecue just to make sure that we get that entire community out there. We'll talk with you to find out to what level we want to actually do that, and then we'll create a tiered system so that we have a larger pool of information gathering, and then we'll tier that down to kind of find out, okay, we've heard a lot of information, what's really the priorities there, and then many times we'll also have an executive level so that we can make some decisions moving forward. And for the most part, as long as we're listening to the community, they'll understand that there's a lot of wishes out there. There's a lot of people that want to do a lot of great things. And as long as their voice has been heard and it's been evaluated, they understand that it can't always go their way. So we've had really good success with that.
How long does that process typically take?
So it can take anywhere from 30 to 90 days, depending on really how in depth we really want to make that. I know we're going to... Exactly. That's exactly a great point.
And we've had some conversations too. Mark talked about communication. So it's not just about hearing people's voices, and it's not just about collaborating with people, but it's also letting them know what came of those things. So one of the things that we'll be working with Emily on is to create a page on the website. And I had a conversation tail end of last week, I think, about what kind of support can you give us for that website information, and they're very supportive of feeding us images and data and information. So as we go through that process, when somebody's been involved in a component of the process, they'll be able to go and see that that data has been captured and how it's being integrated and where we're at in the stages of our project.
And I guess one is, so will these two projects be going on simultaneously, or are we gonna focus on Biltmore first?
So our goal is to start them simultaneously. And then we understand that this solution might just come a little bit faster because of the scale of it's a little bit different than
Any other questions for Lisa? Thank you so much for your presentation. I really want to play with those magnetic boards.
Well, I told you I'm going to leave them today, so.
Yay, toys.
And you just have to say how many more of these new models you need, right? Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Yes. Okay, that takes us to a first reading of some ASBA policy advisories ranging anywhere from board member qualifications to support staff qualifications, use of technology and instruction, etc.
Madam President, these board agenda advisories have been vetted through the membership with ASBA, and for the most part are statutorily small alignments. I would encourage the board to review them over the next few weeks and text me or email me with any questions or call me and let me know if there's more data you want in a specific area. My fundamental sense of each of these is that they're exactly the way they need to be.
Did anything stick out to anybody where they would like to put her on the task right now, or? All right, seeing none, then I'm going to go ahead and move on to item 10B. We had a study session a couple of Saturdays ago, and one of the main areas of focus was our governing board expectations that were actually kind of brought to us through both Mr. Zaragoza and Ms. Young, and we wanted to have language that was close, that matched policy, as well as just kind of updating things. And the idea behind these expectations is just so anyone who may be interested in Creighton District, whether it's because they would like to run for the board or want to come to a board meeting or just want to be more involved in their community, can at a glance just kind of see who we are and what we believe in and our value system and that kind of thing. So, is there any discussion?
I just will add that I think it's also a useful exercise for us as a board on how we want to work together. And I would say engage in continuous learning. One thing that sticks out to me is Ms. Young, chiding us as a board, like we don't really hold ourselves accountable. What does that look like? So this would be the opportunity to say, these are the things we want to be held accountable to. And I appreciate the board's collaborative effort to generate these. As you know, I support them.
I did just want to say that I did follow up with the presenter of that session I went to for the 360, and I think we were just making it way harder than we needed to. But he kind of let me know what they did, so I'm going to work with Dr. Lewis, and we should have that available for when we do this. So.
There is one comment on the exhibit, which is minor, and I don't even know if we really need to change it, but one of the directions that we listed here is please check the appropriate box, and it has always, frequently, often, seldom, not yet, and we deleted the always. That's not a box. We
Hilda updated it on the electronic version.
Great.
Okay.
Otherwise, I endorse.
All right, does that mean there's a motion?
Move the governing board, adopt the governing board expectations as presented.
I second.
Then moved and seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes, fantastic. Are there any future agenda items?
Yes, I'd like a discussion on the next agenda regarding the HF profile in schools. I think we should discuss it prior to getting the results back.
Okay. Ms. McShane?
I will not be at the next meeting, and I requested the junior ambassador update, so I was hoping we could push that by one meeting if possible.
Okay.
Also, I would like for us to add, discussion about, our M&O override and when that needs to go on the ballot for renewal. So that we can discuss with.
Okay.
And, oh, the other thing, just regarding future agenda items, we can remove, I think, training or advocacy at the legislature, because Dr. Lewis and I think, for my purposes, fulfilled that, unless someone else wants to discuss that further.
Helen, did you get
Just wanted to, I don't know if we need to add it in here, but I do want more regular like academic achievement updates.
Okay.
I don't know the frequency, so I will talk to Dr. Lewis about that.
Okay.
With that, I move we adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. Good job.